Today we're here to talk about peace and peace education. But I also have a show of hands. I just have two questions for you guys in this audience. First of all, how many of you guys have actually experienced war? Give me a hand raise. Some kind of war, some kind of major human conflict. I see one person, a few, and they're being a little bit timid, as if this is so beyond our times, isn't it? All right, then are there anyone who has had the experience of being a refugee, or someone for whatever reason has to be uprooted from the country or the city of your origin? So as I had expected, I think we're sitting here today in an audience who have gone through a long period of peace. And Taiwan, indeed, we are living in a peaceful society for a very long time. So why peace, some of you guys may ask. What is peace education? And what exactly is there to talk about peace education? Well, while indeed that we're sitting here today free from the danger or the threat of immediate war, I think we just have to look around us. And I think all of us will agree that we're still surrounded by numerous amounts of disagreement, tension, conflict, and sometimes to a degree of hatred or anger towards people who hold different opinions and people who are different from us. And if you don't believe me, maybe you just quietly think for yourself. You don't have to tell me the answer, all right? How many of you every day will be tempted to check your Facebook or Instagram or Twitter accounts many times a day and wanting just to check the amount of likes or dislikes that you have, all right? And how many of you guys will be tempted every day to want to have a debate with someone who maybe left an uncomfortable or very annoying comment, and you just want to really debate it out with that person? And how many of you guys have actually felt a sense of frustration, disgust, if not deep anger, towards someone you know that who holds a very different opinion and a very different view? As a professor of humanities, I always tell my students that human conflicts and warfare don't start big, they start small. And these feelings of frustrations, agitations, and sometimes to the point of degree of deep anger actually starts from these small instances in our daily lives. And it's just that when things get blown out of proportions, human conflicts, societal conflicts, if not wars, happen. I think because of that, we're here today to talk about peace and peace education. So I think some of you guys have done a little bit of study on our speaker today. Mr. Akira Kawasaki is a member of the executive committee of the Peace Boat, a wonderful NGO organization that travels around the world to promote peace education. He's also a member of the International Steering Committee for the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, ICAN. ICAN received the 2017 Nobel Peace Prize for its contribution to the making of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, TPNW. Since 2008, he coordinates the Global Voyage for a Nuclear-Free World, Peace Boat Hibakusha Project. Hibakusha in Japanese stands for the survivors, or those who suffered from the atomic bomb explosion in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. He organizes these voyages around the world to share the stories of these survivors to people around the world. And in March 2011, when the Japanese earthquake and tsunami happened, which triggered the Fukushima nuclear incident, he also organized a global conference for a nuclear power-free world. So among all the initiatives that he has started and continued, let's first take a video, watch a videotape that captures the Peace Boat Global University that he's been working on.
This is a very special program with Japanese, Sri Lankan, the Filipino, and the Burmese students get together and discussing and studying the common issue that they are facing.
We do lectures, but that's only to prompt students to think about certain issues. Here, it's really about exchanging opinions and exchanging views, and definitely being exposed to actual country situation is different from what you would do in universities.
We also get to see different places, and we actually see the actual place that the things happen. So it's a different way of studying, but it's a good way to learn about these problems.
Hearing their stories, what they do in their country, it gives me a wider perspective of how it is to be a human being in different parts of the world.
It was a really rare opportunity to talk with the people actually from the countries, and there you could talk to the people who are working there, actually solving the problems of today. I just decided to go out on the boat and just meet them.
I think the students learn sort of immensely from other societies, other conflicts, other people. I think just a chance to be on board Peace Boat for like a week is a very powerful learning opportunity.
One very inspiring things about Peace Boat is that it have a very good environment that really set you free, set your mind free, and you are free. There's no international boundary. There's nobody who will limit your thoughts, who will censor what you say. You're just free to think, and you're just free to form a new imagination and new thought that can really help you in your future works.
You get to visit a lot of countries, and you get a lot of insight about things, and you learn theories, you meet a lot of people, you get the experience. It is so many things in one package, and I think I will never regret a single thing about coming on this program. Yeah.
So ladies and gentlemen, with a warm round of applause, let's welcome Mr. Kawasaki.
Good afternoon, everyone. And at the beginning, I'd like to warmly thank Loin-Tai Laoshi and her Cultural Foundation for giving this wonderful opportunity to speak in front of all of you. And also thanks Mei Shaw for the wonderful introduction and this opening. So I came from Tokyo, and today I'm going to speak about peace education, but please do not misunderstand. I'm not a kind of a academic scholar to talk about educational theory. Rather, my approach will be more about practices. And I will introduce how my organization, Peace Boat, and the global campaign named ICAN for the elimination of nuclear weapons have been working, and how the education on peace is relevant in making a change and making a world to go for a better direction. So you saw the picture of the Peace Boat program named Global University. Just a brief explanation about Peace Boat. It was established in 1983, 36 years ago. By a group of students in Tokyo. And it started a very small ship-based program for mutual understanding and discussing about peace issues among young people in Asia. And then it grew up, and since 1990s, we've been conducting global voyages, meaning the ship voyage, literally going around the world, from Japan and going back to Japan, taking more than 3 months. And we've carried over 70,000 people in total in the past 63 years. And for what? Not just for tourism. Yes, it is a kind of tourism because we travel around the world, but in a form of peace education. And a very simple belief, as the name of Peace Boat symbolizes, that going around the world and making friends in various countries becomes the basis for peace in the world. And this Peace Boat became a part of international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, which is an NGO coalition created in 2007 in Melbourne, Australia, which grew up as a very wide, inclusive network of NGOs working towards the elimination of nuclear weapons. Now ICAN has over 500 organizations from around the world and working for the promotion of the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, on which I will talk about later. So Peace Boat actually charters this big passenger ship, which is over 35,000 tons and capable of having about 1,400 people once. And we visit so many places. For example, Japanese students go into a Palestinian refugee camp, making friends in the refugee camp, playing soccer, for example. We collect soccer balls, football, in Japanese schools, and then carry those balls to the refugee camp and provide them and play soccer for the sake of studying and learning from each other. And this kind of worldwide project was initiated in response to a governmental dispute over history education in Japan. At that time, at the initiation of the Peace Boat, 1980s, Japanese government was severely criticized for its way of history education. In the official textbook of history, the crimes and bad behaviors of Japan in the lead up and during the World War II was kind of eliminated or erased. For example, the word of aggression was tried to removed from the history textbook. And because of this, the government was severely criticized by other neighboring states, and there was an obvious political dispute over that. So that time, young students in Japan thought, oh, it's very bad that we have this situation, and we really have to learn from the past. You know, that time students did not have direct experience of the war, but thought it is important to remember and recall from those who have direct memory in there. So at that time, the students chartered a very small passenger ship and started to travel Asian nations and the Asia-Pacific nations for the sake of reconciliation, and mutual understanding. That was the original peace boat. And in early days of peace boat, in this spirit, we once invited the Japanese ex-soldier to come to Nanjing, China, and to visit Nanjing Massacre Museum and realize meetings between Japanese ex-soldiers and bereft family members of Nanjing for the sake of understanding and people-centered reconciliation. And many participants from Japan also accompany in there. Another example is that we are closely working with Korean partners, and we've invited a number of times the Korean women who were forced to serve as sex slaves during wartime by the Japanese military. And this photo is one of them, Ms. Lee Yong-soo, who were forced to serve as sex slave in Taiwan that time, from South Korea. Came on board peace boat. I think this is a photo from 1998, and she paid tribute for those who lost their lives for the brutal acts by the Japanese military. And many Japanese and Korean participants on the voyage remembered and committed not to repeat the same atrocity and crimes. So in a sense, learning from the wars in the past and building peace in future has been a basic mission for Peace Boat. And for this idea, we are conducting systematic peace education programs named Global University, as you saw in the video. And it deals with so many worldwide affairs related to peace and conflict. So using the ship as a place for such peace education is very useful, because in the port of call, you can study in the land. So we already have partners in each country of visit, and they organize programs like study tours. And then after that, on the ship, we can take a few days before entering into the next port to reflect what you've seen and discuss and extract the lessons from the visit. So in that sense, exposure in the land and workshop on the boat are combined together and making a basic structure for Peace Boat program. And in addition to such educational efforts, so we are also committed to humanitarian relief activities for wars and humanitarian disasters. When Iraq War broke up in 2003, Peace Boat not only participated in the campaign to stop war in the street in Japan, but also we mobilized people to donate wheelchairs to hospitals in Iraq. Because of the capacity of the ship, we were able to carry many wheelchairs and some other humanitarian aid stuff to go to the area. And when our ship docked in the port of Jordan, we were able to unload and then transfer them by land in the middle of Iraq. Similarly, helping demining efforts in Cambodia is one of our consistent aid activities. And Peace Boat members of, we have a pool of hundreds of volunteer members of Peace Boat in Japan, and they systematically conduct classes and lectures about the situation of landmines in Cambodia and raise money and donations. And those donations are used to help the Cambodian government agency to not only promote demining, but also rehabilitation and rebuilding of those affected communities. So by doing this, it's a kind of combination. Peace Boat participants visit those villages through our ship voyages, and after coming back to Japan, they can teach what they saw in Cambodia. In such a cycle, we are continuing this kind of project. As Mei referred, Mei referred to, 8 years ago in 2011, there's a great East Japan earthquake and tsunami, where nearly 20,000 people were killed or being missing. And in such a situation, we mobilized volunteers from all over Japan and some from overseas as well, and raised donations and provided support of humanitarian relief. And it is said as promoting resilience to those disasters. So not only just providing humanitarian assistance, but also doing education to prepare for disasters, because disasters do happen anytime. So learning from the past experience to prepare for next emergency is a very important cycle for us. And in pursuing these kind of wide range of activities, we recently made a partnership with the United Nations for the promotion of these sustainable development goals. I don't know how much this SDGs are common here in Taiwan, but this is the 17 goals promoted by United Nations and international community to make this world be sustainable. And these 17 goals include ending poverty, or making zero hunger, or protection of the environment, and keeping the biodiversity, and ocean conservation, and so on. And importantly, making sure peaceful and inclusive society with justice. These important goals are set by the UN so that all political leaders, economic leaders, or academic institutions make sure to follow these instructions to make this globe be sustainable. So Peace Boat is working in this direction, and I believe that making progress is really essential to achieve this, these goals. Now, ICAN, International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. So, eliminating nuclear weapons may sound very, very long-term goal for many of you, because it's really difficult for you to feel the nuclear weapons danger or threat in your daily life. But actually, they exist over 13,000 nuclear warfares, even today, which is often forgotten, you know. After the end of Cold War, almost 30 years ago, the memory of nuclear weapons threat may have been gone. And also, very important point is that the issue of nuclear weapons or other military affairs have been always talked from international political perspective. I think this kind of photo is really common to remember atomic bombing. Yeah, this photo is very famous from Hiroshima. This symbolizes the devastation or destructive power of the bomb. For some people, it may mean that the end of Japanese empire and the liberation of other peoples, maybe. But this photo was taken from the above mushroom cloud. But those who were affected by the bomb did not see this cloud because they were beneath the cloud, like this. So International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons is the international campaign to focus, to put a spotlight on the humanitarian face, human face for those people and suffering, and change the discourse over nuclear weapons from that of international power balance or military parity and so on to humanitarian face of that weapons, and to make the debate more like a people's story. This campaign was originally initiated by the medical doctors of Australia who were concerned of the humanitarian and environmental impact of nuclear weapons if it is detonated today. And then it grew up, supported by various governments or private foundations, religious organizations, and we worked together with the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement in raising voices of the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons of the past and for future. In 2010, International Committee of Red Cross issued a statement about the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons, and they declared that any use of nuclear weapons will be contrary to the international humanitarian law, and thus must be prohibited and eliminated. And some countries, like countries of Austria, Mexico, and Norway, have promoted the discussion, international discussion of the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons and convened government conference. The similar process were in place in prohibiting anti-personnel landmines or cluster munitions. In such cases, the humanitarian impact of those weapons was studied, and then international humanitarian law model was discussed and applied to make a new treaty. And in a similar way, just 2 years ago, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons was adopted. And 122 nations supported. It is almost 2/3 of the UN member states. And it's said that any use of nuclear weapons would be contrary to the rule of international humanitarian law. And it comprehensively and unconditionally prohibited all activities related to nuclear weapons. So it's a kind of dramatic change, because before that, the main discourse was nuclear non-proliferation, meaning some states are granted to possess and keep nuclear weapons, but others are not. So this is a discourse of non-proliferation and the arms control discourse. And complete prohibition is quite different. Nuclear weapons are wrong in anyone's hand because of its humanitarian impact. So this is a challenge that changed the game over the discourse on nuclear weapons. And these are the members of the ICAN campaign, including the staff members and also international steering group members. From among 500 organizations, 10 organizations, including Peace Boat from Japan, consists of core members. And this is a photo taken by taken just after the Nobel Peace Prize ceremony in Oslo 2 years ago. And as you can see, there's a very clear leadership of women. The great majority of this leadership is women and very young generation. I think I would say that mostly the 30s and even 20s are playing a leading role for the elimination of nuclear weapons. So it's quite it's been quite a remarkable experience to me personally, because as a Japanese who have grown up in Japan, the issue of nuclear weapons is related to our history. Because in Japan, Hiroshima and Nagasaki have been repeatedly taught, in history textbook and everywhere. And it's said as a kind of a very important part of the Japanese history, that devastation. But in a sense, the Japanese history education has been kind of insufficient in failing to link it to the current situation of the world. How to deal with today's nuclear threat, how people can help in settling the situation. So for that part, the education that I've been, receiving was not sufficient enough. But having this kind of international family members, in this same campaign, I personally was so struck by very good number of young people in the world are so committed to address the issue of nuclear threat of today. So we combined the knowledge on the past and the perspective for today and future. So we've done various types of activities, starting from marching or lobbying, and also having a dialogue within the UN buildings in achieving this. So in a sense, this kind of international treaties can also be established with efforts of civil society. Treaties generally are binding rules between governments, but civil society can play a significant role in making that. That is why I think Norwegian Nobel Peace Committee provided great honor and award to this campaign. And in that work, Peace Boat activities has also played a significant role by bringing those survivors of atomic bombings, called as hibakusha, to go around the world. In doing these activities, we've been taking much attention and care that it's very vital for us not just talk about Hiroshima and Nagasaki as suffering of Japan, but also to connect other parts of the world, other experience of the world. For example, when those survivors visited Vietnam, we met victims of Agent Orange, those victims of chemical warfare, right? And we also met various nuclear test survivors, Nuclear weapons were used in wartime only twice, in Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan. But over 2,000 nuclear tests have been conducted around the globe. And one example is in Tahiti, French Polynesia, in South Pacific. And those survivors and victims are kind of left behind without no recognition, no follow-up, and so on. So having a unity of those affected in wars and weapons has been so vital for us. And in our endeavor, many Americans also joined. This photo is Mr. Clifton Truman Daniel, who is a grandson of President Harry Truman, who authorized the bombing. And Clifton now joined our activities of ICANN in his attempt to have a better understanding of what his grandfather did and what was the consequences. If the discussion is just international dispute or international debate, this never occurred. By having a human-centered approach, we have been successfully inclusive to have all those voices together. And these efforts have been led to this recognition for the Nobel Peace Prize. And at the ceremony 2 years ago, on the stage was Ms. Setsuko Furlow, who experienced the bombing at the age of 13. And she, after the experience, she moved to the US, and now she's living in Canada, married with a Canadian person. And she is speaking of her suffering to around the world. And she's always saying that this is her duty is for the sake of humanity. And she's paying tribute to all those affected and stood up for the sake of humanity. And saying that this treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons can be the beginning of the end of nuclear weapons. ICANN is now having a new stage because of the success of this treaty making in 2 years. And now we are really making efforts to have upcoming younger generation to be in our activities. So this is a photo of ICANN Academy conducted in Hiroshima. So from the experience in Hiroshima, where many people suffered, but we should not contain it as a kind of Japanese memory, and to link it to the current dangers of the world, and to globalize the voices of those affected be shared among the people of today is so vital. Just 2 weeks ago, the Pope Francis came to Nagasaki and Hiroshima and said that these cities experienced the tragedy for the humanity. That is why the notion that use and possession of nuclear weapons are immoral be reaffirmed by all political leaders. So in concluding, these approaches of the activities I'm engaged in is to put people's suffering in center. Talking about peace, sometimes you tend to have a kind of, you tend to think that, okay, if governmental leaders make negotiation and avoid wars and conflict, then it is a peace. Yes, it is a peace in part. But our approach is more human-centered. Listen to the sufferers. And it can generate a power to make a difference. Talking to the survivors and having empathy and feeling the pain and start to think of what you can do for a change. And that's how Peaceboat and ICANN have been working, and that's how I believe peace education in this globalized and somehow polarized world and serves for a better future. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kawasaki, for giving us a very brief but general overview of the years and years of good work that you've been doing in both Peaceboat and also ICANN. So I guess I think we're today in a very safe environment to really think about what this really means to the contemporary 21st century. So if you don't mind, may I start with a little story? So when I was a doctoral student, I spent 2 to 3 years studying in Japan, and at the time, my study interest was wartime literature, especially doing comparative studies of some Chinese writers writing about war and Japanese writers writing about war. And I was living in Japan, doing my research, having a great time. And one day, I came back to Taipei to visit my parents, and I was invited to a dinner banquet with what I call all the adults. And at the banquet, there was a really like a very well-respected senior lady. who was a writer, and she just asked me, "So Mei, what are you studying in Japan?" I said, "Oh, I'm looking into a number of Japanese writers who lived in China during the wartime. There was one writer named Hayashi Kyoko, who was a child when her family moved to Manchuria at the time under the government expedition. And she lived through her childhood years in Manchuria and then got repatriated back to Japan, to Nagasaki, and experienced atomic bombing. So throughout the rest of her writing career, she was really struggling between these experiences of, as Japanese in Japan, they were quote-unquote the victimizers. And then coming back to Japan, she became one of the victims of the atomic bomb dropping. I was just narrating this my PhD thesis, and suddenly this lady, just well-respected senior, just said, "What is there to talk about Japanese being victims? You have no idea what they have done to China." And she was about to spend the rest of the dinner banquet telling me and re-educating me about history. And I remember when I was sitting there having done 2 to 3 years of research and suddenly be reduced to this moment of, I feel a little bit ashamed, and I feel speechless as to how I can stand up against someone who had actually gone through that experience of war. I can approach it from a theoretical standpoint, academic standpoint, because I'm the younger generation, but what did I know? So I guess I maybe be speaking for many of us sitting here today, as if anyone has studied Chinese history, I grew up thinking the dropping of the atomic bomb was a savior of our nation, savior of the Chinese race. Really, without it, more and more people are going to suffer. Until years and years later, I went to America, completely undergone a different kind of historical education. Then I learned the other side of the story. And even till today, it is hard for me to mediate between both sides of the story. And earlier you mentioned about the human faces. And I remember the sense of shame or the sense of littleness that I had in front of this senior lady who had gone through that wartime experience, as well as the Japanese writer that I had studied who had gone through these atrocities. So my question is, how do we mediate? How do we really bring the idea of peace back to a place where everyone can really start to feel comfortable, not to feel either guilty, maybe from the Japanese side, or a little bit ashamed from the victim side? How do you do that? How do you do that in your effort?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's a very important and interesting question. I think in such a environment like Peace Boat, where many students, people from various parts of the world sit together and discuss such matter, is really important and help. Meaning that, I'm from Japan, and if I'm sitting in front of a Korean person, just bilaterally, and discuss the matter regarding atomic bombing or World War II, then it should be always very much nationalistic discussion. It can't be avoided. But by having various people and to sit together and to look at the issue from the global perspective, that helps, and that provides us to constructive discussion in pursuit of a solution for today. And this does not mean that as a Japanese citizen, the issue related to the responsibility to the past will never, how to say, disappear. We have to, the Japanese citizens have to be mindful of that, and also keep on working on that it will not change. But at the same time, we shouldn't contain the discussion regarding the wars and weapons in such nationalistic framework. And some sort of global solution will be very important. I know by traveling around the world with those survivors, it's always really difficult to have a discussion with neighbors of Japan. You know, closer, more difficult. It's a really common phenomenon, and it relates to the fact that the country of Japan has not been sufficiently dealt with the matter for the past, for which all Japanese citizens, including myself, have some responsibility. So it's a big task. At the same time, let me repeat that global setting for a global solution is really key.
So thank you very much. So if I were to also push the question a little bit more, some people also argue and say that, well, sometimes war or conflict or a certain kind of violent means is not the best solution, but it could be a necessary or lesser evil to counter or to overcome or to defeat the absolute evil, right? And this is usually a very common kind of argument, you know, in the moral theories of, you know, justify war and whatnot. I want to hear about your opinion on that, and I want to maybe share with the audience in the 2017 Nobel Prize acceptance speech, I think Setsuko Thurlow, who was one of the victims of the atomic bomb dropping, had this very, I think, humanistic passage in saying that, she said that when I remember Hiroshima, the first image that comes to mind is my 4-year-old nephew, Eiji. Okay, his little body transformed into an unrecognizable melted chunk of flesh, I think because of the heat, right? He kept begging for water in a faint voice until his death released him from agony, which means he died, right? And then I guess the takeaway message that Ms. Thurlow wants to say is these weapons they could never be necessary evil. They're the ultimate evil. However, I think that the moral dilemma is that sometimes when evil combating evil, is there such a thing called necessary or lesser evil? Is there something that's permissible? And you probably encountered this question a lot in your effort towards peace education. And how do you respond to that?
So the Setsuko's approach, talking about his own nephew as an example, is so powerful in drawing attention to each individual. In the other case, Setsuko has a long yellow banner type of thing, where all the names of 341 schoolmates who passed away due to the bombing from her own school. Those 341 names, very long banner, and she carries always in her public lecture and show it. So humanitarian approach means that looking at those each individuals and the lives and stories about it, you know. And I know that the wars are sometimes kind of justified in the theoretical debate. But please, I would like to think of, please, how to say, what winning a war would mean. In history textbook in the Roman Empire in the ancient world, country A wages war and wins country B, you know. But especially today, with nuclear weapons exist, what winning a war means, you know? So, and by having the reality in mind, those theories to justify fighting, violence in the eve of war would be naturally challenged. And that's the challenge that each one of you need to have in mind in challenging all those international issues.
So, I mean, and if we're to bring this big question, right, the historical lessons and the geopolitical politics down to more of a home level, I know that today you really want to address to probably the younger audience in our crowd as well, because we're looking at 21st century. If I may share a little bit of my personal observation, I feel that in our current century, let's say in a place like Taiwan, as I mentioned earlier in the opening, now we generally live in a very peaceful society. War is something so far away from us. But I feel that this idea of conflict or violence is changing its own nature. So I call it the changing faces of violence, in the sense that, like earlier, because you mentioned there's a human face, like in the previous time you can see the human face. But interestingly, perhaps in the current or the younger generation, a lot of the conflict and tension comes online, which means that the faces are unknown, identities are unknown. There is anonymous existence of many different people uttering different kinds of opinions and views. And so if the previous century is more like institution to institutional violence, country to country, corporations to corporations, I feel that we're kind of down to a level perhaps personal to personal, where you can social media groups versus social media groups. So in this kind of like anonymity, so anonymous identity, how do you combat violence? How do you promote peace? And is technology actually making things worse? Is it, or is it actually it can be a very convenient tool for us to promote more of peace education?
So, taking the example of Peace Boat, it's a very unique place for training offline. On the ship, yeah, we have some internet connection, but it's very limited. And you have to live together. If you're on the ship, you cannot escape. You know, if you escape, then it will be disastrous. And sometimes we invite people from conflict areas, for example, from Israel and Palestine, or from different ethnic groups from within Sri Lanka. Intentionally, we invite those people from different conflicting groups and ask them to live together. And at the beginning, it's sometimes, for example, for Israeli and Palestinian students, it's really difficult to shake hands even. But as a matter of fact, many family members have been killed, or very, very difficult story exists. So we have to respect that tension or that kind of a feeling. But the days go on, and they have some discussion and seminars, and human interaction make people's bond stronger. So today's violence, including international and intrastate violence, have been generated and promoted through online speeches, hate speeches, or like a provocation and so on. And I think you've been experiencing, but the online anonymous speeches can very easily be used just for the provocation. And that provocation is really good for market, because if you get good number of likes, then it will make benefit, right? So there is a business for that. So you need to have some sort of resilience, and some different alternative approach of communication. So get trained in the offline, person-to-person communication and skill is really important. So in doing so, the Peace Boat is putting importance on the feeling, how you feel, you know. It's a very important part of Peace Boat activities. For the knowledge you can get from internet, even photos you can get from Instagram, but feeling you cannot properly get without having a direct interaction or visiting and so on. So this feeling part is so crucial.
So I think you're referring to empathy, right? How do you empathize deeply with the experience of someone, even though maybe you haven't actually experienced it yourself, right? So to go simply from sympathy to empathy. And I think that is a big question, I think, in the educational field. How do we teach students empathy? Has anybody here taken a course called Empathy? Literally raise your hand because I would like to talk to you, and I'll steal your syllabus and teach it back in Hong Kong. I'm in the School of Humanities, and I haven't known any colleagues who are teaching empathy, but this is starting to be a rising question that a lot of us are asking. How do we teach students to not just to know, as you mentioned, on the head knowledge, but to feel how others have gone through? So, and I think, so some people propose that, okay, let's do storytelling. All right, so I think that's exactly what you're doing. You're bringing the previous victims or the people who suffer through war, whether it's regardless from which side. It could be the comfort women from Korea, or it could be, you know, victim, the hibakusha from Japan. But I also sometimes feel that with storytelling, it is also easy to go towards this direction of accusations or blame, or potentially being utilized. So people would tell a very sad story of someone who suffered from something, and therefore as a way to justify a particular cause. And more dangerously, perhaps, to be hijacked by politics or political kind of discourse. So how do you manage that balance between storytelling and staying focused on the humanitarian, kind of like that humanistic feelings, versus being used towards another political goal?
Yeah, for that part, I'm really, really grateful for those atomic bombing survivors, hibakushas in Japan, those who have been in the frontier of the movement to abolish nuclear weapons, because their main call has consistently been as the in working to not repeat the same mistake, rather to retaliate or kind of counterattack or something like that, you know. I have a very interesting experience in almost 20 years ago in India, when Peace Boat docked in India. We had a poster exhibition session of the photos of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in the Indian people, to the Indian people. And some of them came to us, oh, it's deadly weapons and very strong weapons. That is why I support the Indian government decision to have nuclear weapons. Yeah.
To use against the Pakistani.
Yeah. So that was right after India and Pakistan conducted nuclear tests. So, yeah, sometimes, you know, depending on how you present the issue, the same fact can be used in a different direction.
So how did you respond to that comment?
I think I talked to them about the personal stories in details that I heard from the survivors, and how they're even suffering today, even after 60 or 70 years, and so on. So, looking back at the history of Japan, if people were not wise, maybe Japan or Japanese survivors might have gone to a campaign to arm Japan with nuclear weapons to deter a future attack and so on, you know. But luckily, we did not. And for that, I'm really grateful for those the leaders of the survivors to have led the campaign in the reasonable direction. This is a disastrous experience for everyone, not for only Japanese, for everyone. That is why we need to make worldwide efforts to eliminate these deadly weapons, you know? So that aspect is really, really important. And at the same time, we know if it is only Japanese people to talk about of the disaster. That is why Japanese survivors are working together with Tahitians or Marshall Islanders, you know, who have suffered similarly from nuclear weapons, and to make it global, and to make it global voices for a global call. I think that has been a practice, and that's the way that we need to continue to go for.
So, if I were to just to ask one more question, I guess still, I think you're addressing a lot of the geopolitical events in the past and continuously these impact on the global scale. But oftentimes, whether or not we're living in Hong Kong or, you know, Japan or Taiwan or whatnot, our immediate concerns is what goes on around us. Okay, how do you bring peace education on that big macro geopolitical level that oftentimes requires a bit of knowledge and understanding for especially, you know, younger people, down to something that they can actually feel? You talk about human feelings, and feel and taste and know the importance of it, so that they would really feel committed to continue with this mission, you know. And maybe you can share a little bit, like I just met you at lunch earlier, I asked a question, why are you doing this, right? I mean, you also grew up in a peaceful time, post-war Japan, right? You had an actual experience where why are you doing what you're doing with so much conviction and commitment?
So when you ask the audience that how many of you experienced war, I thought, you know, the definition of the experience of war matters, you know. In a sense, I haven't experienced war that my country is directly involved, or my house or my town being bombed, or my family members having going to go to battle and so on. So for that meaning, I do not have any experience of war. But in my life, for example, there's a series of US war on Iraq since my university time. And for such military affairs, the government has at least indirectly participated in that. And we taxpayers are part of that, you know, contribution. So in this world, is it really possible that you are kind of, you do not have any relationship with the ongoing war, you know? So in a sense that we are experiencing a war. And the reason why I say is that I started this kind of peace activism during my university time when the US started the Gulf War in 1991. And it was just a couple of years after I traveled just as a tourist, individual tourist, in the Middle East region. And that time, as a tourist, I do not have any particular ideological background, but I was really lucky to see the people in the Middle East region. That time, it was very soon after the Iran-Iraq war that continued for about 8 years. So I saw the devastation and people still suffering. But at the same time, they really warmly welcomed me as a very strange Japanese traveler, walking in the street of Tehran, for example. So those, how to say, feeling or kind of a distant friendship with the people in the region, and the very fact that people in the region is under heavy attack of the military conflict, just really naturally mobilized myself, So the reason I'm continuing Peace Boat is that it's really good way to, how to say, to personalize world affairs. If you have visited some place in actual sense, then it will become a part of yourself. So if there's some serious problem in the country that you visited, your feeling will be quite different from that just you seeing on those world affairs on TV or on smartphones. So that kind of connectedness is really matters, I think.
All right, so I guess we'll open up the floor for any questions, comments. The floor is yours. Yes, please. Do we have a microphone? Yes. And maybe you can quickly introduce yourself and then raise the question. Thank you so much.
Okay. I'm a person just retired from my job career 2 years ago. And now I'm associated with an organization also having the same goal as ICANN, with pursuing blessings and peace for the mankind. I have one question. It's very impressive that you listed those 122 countries supporting the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. Yet, regretfully, those countries having nuclear weapons today, including United States, Russia, France, China, and so forth, they are not in the list. And I would like to know, and also how about your comments on what ICANN's approach, or how will ICANN do to make some influencing power on those countries so that they will abandon or abolish their nuclear weapons eventually, someday.
Yeah, thank you very much. So very good, important point, Yes, treaty was adopted, but those who have nuclear weapons are out of the treaty. So how we can make change? It's a very typical question to be asked. Even without the participation of nuclear armed states, as of today, by having a treaty to provide nuclear weapons are illegal and nuclear weapons are bad and inhumane, we can create political, economic, and social pressures on nuclear weapons and on nuclear armed states. For example, having provided that nuclear weapons are illegal in any circumstances, it will be politically very difficult for any government leaders to decide to use nuclear weapons. So nuclear weapons becomes a non-usable weapon. And again, at the time of global era, one atrocity would be spread for the whole globe instantly. You can't use such terrible weapons. And then economically, the wise government leaders will think of, is it relevant to keep these weapons despite the fact that it cannot be used? Keeping those nuclear arsenal requires money. That is why ICANN is working on banks now. And we are asking them to divest from nuclear weapons producing companies. And it has been successful. And already over 30 banks worldwide decided to divest from nuclear weapons producing companies. And this is a very similar approach that campaigners did in cluster munitions or landmines. Those weapons are now established as inhuman and illegal weapons. So the banks, financial institutions helping those production will be seen as inhumane act or illegal act. So in this way, at least we can create economic pressure on the maintenance or development of nuclear weapons. And finally, and social pressure is just like Pope Francis made a strong remark. You know, religious or social awareness on the illegality or inhumanity of certain weapons would become a strong pressure for the governments for retention of those weapons. And of course, it will take a long time for any of the current nuclear armed states to abandon those nuclear weapons. But we have a good example and test case on the Korean Peninsula. You know, at least the smallest nuclear armed states, DPRK, North Korea, is now seriously negotiating about this dismantling of nuclear weapons. So if it comes successfully, then it will be a good model for others, other governments to follow.
Thank you. Are there other questions from the audience? Yes, please, this lady.
Thank you very much. This is Serena Chen. I'm working for NGO for International Development here in Taiwan, but my personal interest is disarmament campaign and humanitarian laws. And I have a question regarding to the peace education. Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation and sharing of experiences. My question is more about how to motivate our public or younger generation to take action. I think it's wonderful that we bring the importance of empathy and how we educate, how we share this knowledge, but the next step, like how especially in peace movement or disarmament campaign, how we mobilize those people who already empathize with the issues to take action. Especially we emphasize on like nonviolent method, etc. And it's not easy to get the attention of the media if you are taking this like non-confrontational approach. So would you give us some like very concrete examples or suggestion? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think setting a doable medium-term goal is very important. You know, fighting for a peaceful and nuclear weapon-free future is a very general long-term goal. You know, so it's too big for people. You know, so to become a successful campaign, I think setting a goal like in the case of ICAN. Creating a new treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons has been a major goal that was achieved 2 years ago. But it took about 10 years to come to the goal. But it was achievable, achievable goal, and it was achieved. And now, many campaigners of ICAN around the world are promoting its signature and ratification by the governments. And also, in cities, local municipalities, we are promoting the mayors or municipalities or local assemblies express support for the treaty or for the goal of Operation Nuclear Weapons. You know, all those actions are kind of feasible and achievable setting. So that's very important. And without those setting and just try to just repeating the big goal like complete peace and complete nuclear free may distract people's attention. So that's the, I'm not, I can't recommend you a specific example for the Taiwanese context, which I think you can consider, but some clear goals that people in Taiwan, in partnership with the local authority or others, that will be very important.
Can I just take this opportunity to also raise a very quick supplementary question? So Said, I know that actually we have a number of even high school students here with us today, or maybe online looking at the live stream, and also their teachers. They unfortunately don't have the time or the means to get on Peace Boat at the moment. Maybe in the future, if someone wants to implement some kind of curriculum or teaching in their classroom next semester on peace education, where do they start? Like, if I'm to ask you to design like a two months long curriculum for Taiwanese students in high school, what exactly would you cover?
Well, there are quite a number of examples in some schools in Japan, and also on the ICANN website we have a peace education and disarmament education's program already up there. And but if you think of some kind of curriculum for a semester or for some months, combining the, I'd say some sort of exposure session to those affected by wars or conflicts or violence. That's a very essential component. And to learn about the structure that made those problems happen. And finally, discussing about the solution, better change, you know. Those will be a major component in a kind of a curriculum. And in the case of Peace Boat Global University, we have several steps, you know, to learn from the reality and to feel from the reality and to know and understand why this happened, and then to understand how you are connected to the issue, and finally to discuss and train skills to make change. I think these 5 steps are very important. And also in Peace Boat experience, it's very important for such a peace education program that always you need to have that your classroom or discussion place a safe place that anyone can say anything. This is a very difficult part, and sometimes very strong vocal boy or girl sometimes may have some sort of domination in the classroom, which is very counterproductive, particularly for this kind of peace education.
So kind of experiential learning, right, to learn and to feel, analyzing the causes of conflict, and I think what you mentioned, creating a linkage with us, with the local context, and having the skills for solutions, I think as that lady was raising. Thank you. I think I saw a hand there and a hand. How about this gentleman first and then that lady? All right, so that gentleman in the middle, and then you'll be the next.
Thank you very much for the very interesting talk. I'm Motohikawa from Japan, Hokkaido, and currently studying at the university at the university in Taipei doing exchange. And as a student, I'm really interested in the global university peace sports. And as a Japanese, like kind of, it's not really hard to imagine how beneficial it is that as a Japanese who are living in a really peaceful society, it must be very interesting to talk to and discuss conflict topics with with students from countries in which some conflicts are going on. But how about, what do you think are the motivation or purpose for students who are not from Japan, like from Myanmar and those countries that they have conflicts? Why would they join the Peace Board seminar, and what they learn?
Yeah, thank you. I think you saw the video, and you saw that people from Myanmar or Sri Lanka or other countries that that experienced conflict and wars in a very recent days have joined. And there are so many students or the universities, you know, that want to be engaged in the Peace Board programs, because for them, peace building is actual need of today. So it's sometimes very interesting to see in a classroom of Peace Board, the students from conflict area, say from Sri Lanka or Myanmar, ask, what is the lesson for the post-war peace building in Japan? And then Japanese students react, we do not know, because it's already 70 years or more, so we don't know the experience. Rather, they want to ask them to what's the situation of Sri Lanka and so on. So it's kind of a shame to see that in so-called peace nations, the value of being in a peace is kind of forgotten, and lessons from the war and the atrocities are really, really lost. It's really a shame to see, but I think you need to have that kind of dialogue in a setting where people from different contexts, you know, meet each other and learn from each other. If you see some students from conflict area, I think you would immediately want to go back to the libraries of Japan, for example, and study how this war, you know, developed, and how we created peace from there, you know. So by having that kind of multicultural or different background communication, it would inspire you for and to regain what you have lost from your history.
I think that lady earlier had a hand up. No? No? Okay. Wait, I think is the lady in the red, the green scarf? Did you have your hand up?
Okay. Yes.
I think you had a hand.
Okay. I think there are two different issues here. One is about peace building of all kinds of conflicts, and the other is dealing with the anti-nuclear threat. In the Taiwan context, the anti-nuclear threat is, I think, somewhat attenuated. First of all, Taiwan had the opportunity to develop a bomb, and it decided not to. Two, it has voted against developing more nuclear power stations. And three, it has been prevented from attending all these international bodies in which these treaties are made. So the whole nuclear context for Taiwan, I don't see as part of the curriculum here. It has made its proper decisions, and it has been prevented of acting further on the global stage. In terms of peace conflict, peace and conflict, that's a different question. So I think there are really two different questions here, at least as far as Taiwan is concerned.
Thank you. And I think indeed, right, if I were to share, I think, you know, I've been living in Hong Kong, and I think the past few months I experienced a very bizarre phenomenon where a society can turn from so peaceful to suddenly some unrest situation really becomes a part of our daily life. As many of you guys probably seen on the news, all the universities had somewhat had a sudden stop of the semester. In our particular university, I had to turn everything online. In Chinese University, this semester just terminated. And that really brings home this feeling that, wow, you know, we have been living in peaceful time, or we have taken what we call peace for granted. But sometimes just with one political or social issue, something can trigger towards a society that suddenly get thrown into this moment of confusion or chaos. And so I agree. I feel that nuclear weapon, you know, warheads, all these issues seems quite far away from the context of Taiwan, maybe Hong Kong, or, you know, General East Asia per se. But I think conflicts are actually everywhere. It's just a matter of what kind of trigger is going to bring it out on a greater level. So maybe we can take this opportunity, maybe is that kind of peace, I guess, peace education in peaceful zones. Would you do it differently? Like when you talk about nuclear, you know, deterrence and all that, or, you know, prohibition doesn't ring a bell. What else can you talk about?
Well, I think, you know, yeah, I agree to the points that you've raised, but at the same time, it's really important for anyone to understand what nuclear weapons are. You know, the problems related to nuclear weapons or nuclear technology precisely or accurately, because in a world with nuclear weapons, any conflict can be led to a nuclear war. That's even for those countries, or for people in living countries without nuclear weapons, or countries that committed not to have nuclear weapons, any armed conflict can lead to a nuclear devastation. And in this globally independent world, no country can be free from the threat. So in that sense, regardless of the policy of the government, it's fair to have some sort of attention to that.
There's another question from the audience. This relates to, once again, the online platforms. So earlier we kind of briefly mentioned about online media, social media, as it can be taken as a form of violence, you know, cyberbullying, cyber, you know, hate speech and so on. How about video games? Online video games where violence oftentimes is in the center of it. And when a mass number of the generation at the moment is so drawn to this online entertainment, doesn't that feed into something that goes against the peace education that you guys are promoting? How do you guys combat this new form of violence?
Yeah, so actually, in actual armed military combat, video game type of components are introduced. And in many meetings and discussions, I'm frequently asked, what would you do after nuclear weapons are eliminated? And then the next issue will be robotic weapons or armed drones, and all those, you know, machines without people become weapons, and it is used, or it is increasingly used. And already there is a report in the US military that those machine-based military operation is triggering kind of effects on those personnel. PlayStation syndrome. It is a kind of naming for that. So the video games, I do not want to, how to say, just dismiss the existence of those games, and there is a kind of a amusement value and so on. Nonetheless, there is a certain risk that it's eliminate the sense of fear or pain, and get people's sense very much careless of that part of the consequence of violence. So there is a serious, potentially bad behaving elements in those part of the technology, I think.
Maybe just time for one more question. Ooh, suddenly we have everyone who wants to raise questions. Maybe that gentleman over there.
Thank you for your representation. Currently, I'm studying medicine in Chang'an University, and I have a question. Is that I know most of people, we want to approach peace in our daily lives, but sometimes the environment changes so rapidly, so that all the information floods in, and it seems so overwhelming for us to totally understand the situation. Just like current social events happening in Hong Kong, like Hong Kong government and Hong Kong people and Chinese government, they all hold different opinions, and sometimes it is very hard for them to sit down and have a rational conversation with each other. So the question I want to ask is that how can we approach peace in such a rapid changing society? Yes, thank you.
Maybe everyone will keep your question very short, and we'll take all of you, and then we'll answer together. So yes, the lady. Do we have a microphone? And I think I saw one more hand here. Maybe I'll just one more. So everyone, if you stay there real quick, then we can answer them. Yes.
Thank you. I learned about global citizenship education in South Africa, so I want to bring in South perspective. In the program, I see mentioned more about like experiential learning for the students. How would you say about like local involvement, like for locals to voice up themselves? And because sometimes like humanitarian like promotion, it can become too simplified as well. Only like, for example, we have heard about voluntary tourism. How would you respond to that?
So I guess you're asking the question, when we do experiential learning, how do we put in a local context that is really relevant to the learner, right? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And I think maybe this gentleman.
Thank you. I thank you for the bringing in of the need for more emphasis on empathy in the classroom, and especially in the secondary school classroom. Being a history teacher in a secondary school at a Quaker school in New York City, has spent a number of years thinking about peace education in the secondary school history classroom, and I wonder if the United Nations or your particular group are interested in expanding the Peace Boat mission beyond the university idea to a large idea, maybe similar to the scale at which you talked about with the treaty to ban nuclear weapons, as a way of strengthening international organizations like the UN and the kind of pressure that they can put on governments to reform educational standards. As it is now, there's very little emphasis on peace education in the secondary school curriculum because of emphasis on other just other priorities.
Are you teaching in Taiwan, or are you teaching in the U.S.? Are you talking about the U.S. context or the Taiwan context?
Really, in any country. I teach in New York City
right now, okay.
But I live in Taipei right now, so it's that both are important to me.
Thank you.
My kids are in school here in Taiwan right now.
I see. Great. Real quick, this lady and this gentleman, and we have to close. So was there? Oh, you're past. Okay. So how about this gentleman? I have several questions regarding education, so I think we can answer them together. Yes.
In your slides, you have shown us a very interesting figure of the number of warheads of different countries. I was wondering whether you can elaborate a little more on the statistics of the numbers for the last decades, from year to year. And in your organization, do you have the roadmap of how to reduce these numbers in the next decade?
Okay, so if I may suggest, maybe we can answer this immediate question. It's more of an isolated question regarding your roadmap to reduce the warheads. And I think we have two questions regarding how do we really implement classroom teaching, especially maybe secondary school, experiential learning included. Lastly, I think a great general question, how do we handle peace in this fast-changing environment when things are changing too fast with too much information? Okay, so this one, and then the education question, and the last one.
Thanks. So for the roadmap of the reduction of nuclear weapons, we have so many plans already that experts or international commissions or UN agencies have been presented. And 10 years will be enough for the elimination of the total existing 13,000 nuclear warheads, based on the experience that immediately after Cold War in early 1990s, between 1,000 to 2,000 nuclear warheads are annually reduced. So it's technically possible. So it's a matter more about matter of political will. So I don't touch into the details of that. But now we have clear prohibition at the treaty level. So taking 10 or more years, concrete steps can be in place, starting from some sort of a reduction of the role of nuclear weapons, and then go to quantities and numbers of those weapons. And I can respond if you have some more specific questions later after the session is closed. And for the learning process, so Peaceport is also learning from other entities like our partners in Africa, or sometimes in Australia or university institutions in Latin America. And in each part of the world, they have their own way of learning process or exchange programs, study programs. So we are always discussing about the development of those programs. And it's not Peaceport alone to make everything. Rather, we are always introducing the existing program from the local partners. So, and also UN agencies are very good friends of us, and they have their own programs. For example, UN ODA, Office of Disarmament Affairs, have the youth-oriented programs on the disarmament education. So we are working together with them for those, through those partnerships. So in pursuing those development and the enhancement of the partnership, we are always making the program be better. So in the process, I think we can further communicate and make some sort of progress. So if you have any specific ideas for collaboration, we are always open for that. And for the big questions for this, how to make peace, or like in this situation, I think it's really difficult to provide you a simple answer. But for any change for a better society or better world, people's action to stand up and voice up, speak up, is really, really important. That must be respected. So, you know, any change, for example, ending slavery or abolition nuclear weapons or any human rights or democracy or whatever, small action, direct action matters. At the same time, it needs to always be engaged into dialogue, engage in different sectors. For example, in the case of ICANN, we really fight for abolition of nuclear weapons. We demonstrate. We make some sort of direct actions. But at the same time, we always talk with governments, including the governments of nuclear armed states, for dialogue and negotiation. While understanding such negotiation will not bring about any immediate solution, but still having this door for dialogue open is really key element. So always peace will be achieved through such direct actions, the combination of direct actions and open and inclusive dialogue.
Thank you. If I were made to close, as an educator myself, I'm also constantly learning. Recently, I took my students to visit this institution called United Worlds College. It's a pretty famous, educational institution around the world. They have a number of campuses around the world. They do have one in Hong Kong. And the mission statement of the school is to promote peace education. And I learned something really interesting. Let's say in a lecture hall like this, students from day one entering the school are taught a certain kind of sign language. So for example, when someone's talking, you agree, you just do this. You'd have to say agree, just do this. And if you disagree, they have another sign language. But one thing that really touched my heart was they do this thing called, if you feel offended by someone's, speech, you just do this. And interestingly, you just do this. It's like, hey, I'm hurt, I'm offended by your language. And the speaker, without interrupting the speaker would take note of it, and that person would be given the priority to speak first in response. And I think I learned so much that, that is a day-to-day, little practice of what you talked about, inclusive discussion and dialogues, and it's something that's so easy to be implemented, but I never thought of it. So I think there are definitely long ways and many different ways we can create and try to brainstorm about how we actually implement such kind of peace education into our daily lives in different local contexts. So thank you for illuminating us with many decades of hard work that you've been doing in this field. And with that, can we give Mr. Kawasaki a really, really warm round of applause?
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.